the most obvious, of course, when we talk about the elections here, when we look at the markets, is about the tariffs and the impact on China. What could that impact look like?
So former President Trump has talked about both putting tariffs on the entire planet and then specifically higher tariffs on China. There's a lot of debate in Washington about whether that former goal of global tariffs is feasible. But it seems quite certain that he will, with his aides, rather quickly move to put much higher tariffs on China, both as a leverage point for potential negotiations, but also as a measure to, in his accounting, even out the economic relationship and make sure that the U.S. is getting the benefit from it that he thinks it deserves. So it's hard to tell exactly what the level of tariffs would be and on which sectors they would be applied. He's saying 60% on everything. Likely that would be dialed back because there are some items where it just wouldn't make sense. But personally, I'm expecting roughly a tripling or a quadrupling of current already high U.S. tariff levels on direct shipments from China to the United States.
And what would a response look like to the rest of the region? We've been talking about China plus one, friendshoring, nearshoring. What would the impact look like on some of the U.S. allies like Japan or South Korea?
So at this level of tariffs, there will be significant trade diversion with moving of factories and productive capacity to other countries in Asia or even in Latin America to try and get around that tariff. And because there's still the productive capacity in China and the consumption capacity in the United States, and both of those somehow need to be met. So that diversion will happen, but then sector by sector and business by business, some will find that they're caught in a pincer between these policy sets, and there's some serious risk for people in terms of their upstream supply and then their downstream ability to sell to the U.S. So really it needs to be looked at company by company.
Kurt, I've just got back from 2 weeks in Beijing, and the sense that I was getting on the ground over there in the capital, even speaking to officials there, was that they are very concerned about this U.S. election, and particularly if we do see a Trump 2.0 scenario. And that could be because of some of the talk of the composition of that administration. If you were likely to see, for instance, a China hawk like Bob Lighthizer in, say, what has been sort of thrown out there in a commerce or treasury position, what that could mean, as you say, for some of those export controls. So give us a sense from some of the companies that you are talking to, what they're feeling about this, because the thinking here is that there are pros and cons to both sides. You know, China sees Trump as transactional but unpredictable, but it also doesn't fit with their narrative and their sort of propaganda around what they think of the Trump administration, given that Harris, you know, her roots come from the global south, arguably.
So I think that Beijing officials are torn between two choices, neither of which they would really like to work with. A potential Harris administration that would continue the Biden administration policies on technology denial, and trying to continue to establish a principle of the U.S. continuing to strengthen its alliance relationships, having dialogue with China, but then taking unilateral action without negotiation. That's not a great situation for China, and that's what they would face more of under her election. With former President Trump coming in charge, I think there is a certain degree of predictability around this tariff question that we talked about, and then less predictability about whether that tariffing by the United States and then China's retaliation could then lead to a negotiation or not. So I think a key watch point fairly early in 2025 would be whether the United States and China actually sit down at the table and negotiate some revised format for U.S.-China economic relationships that's satisfactory to the Trump administration.